San Quentin Riots. The night chaos took over California's oldest prison, the night the walls shook. If you think you've seen chaos before, you haven't seen what happened inside San Quentin that night. Subscribe, like, and stick around, because this story will leave you questioning what survival really means. It was supposed to be a quiet summer evening in 1982. The guards had just finished count, the inmates were locked in, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights echoed down the cell blocks. Then, at 9:17 p.m., the power went out. Every hallway plunged into darkness. At first, the guards thought it was just another rolling blackout. California had seen its share that year. But what they didn't know was that the blackout wasn't an accident. It was the opening move in the most violent prison riot in San Quentin's history. San Quentin State Prison, built in 1852, was already a time capsule of brutality, peeling paint, rusted bars, and corridors that smelled of sweat and fear. Behind its massive stone walls were over 2,000 men serving sentences ranging from robbery to cold-blooded murder. But that night, those walls couldn't contain what was about to unfold. Officer Raymond Doyle, 42, was the first to notice something was wrong. As he walked toward the West Block with his flashlight, he heard whispers. Not just from one cell, from dozens. Then came the unmistakable sound of metal scraping metal, makeshift tools, shanks, something being pried open. "Control, this is Doyle." "Something's." His radio went dead mid-sentence. Down in the control room, the monitors flickered with static before going completely dark. Someone had cut the internal power grid from inside. Minutes later, chaos erupted. From the East Block, an explosion, small, but loud enough to shatter glass. Flames licked the corridor. The inmates had overpowered a guard, taken his keys, and were now flooding the corridors. The air filled with screams, not all of them from prisoners. By 9:30 p.m., San Quentin had become a war zone. Outside, sirens blared as Marin County police rushed toward the prison's perimeter. Families living nearby gathered by their windows, watching smoke rise from behind the razor wire. No one knew who started it or how far it would spread. Inside, the inmates moved with terrifying coordination. It wasn't random chaos, it was planned. Doyle managed to crawl into a storage room, his arm bleeding from a deep cut. He used the emergency phone, which still worked off an independent line. "It's not a riot," he whispered to the dispatcher. "It's an escape attempt." Those words set off alarm bells across the entire state correctional system. SWAT teams were mobilized. Helicopters circled overhead. But inside, the guards were losing control. The inmates had barricaded corridors with overturned tables, set fires, and were using the kitchen as a weapon depot. Meanwhile, deep within the prison, a name began circulating among the inmates: Hollis. No one knew exactly who he was. Some said he was an ex-gang leader transferred from Folsom. Others said he'd been in solitary for 5 years, planning revenge. But one thing was certain: he was the one giving orders. Around 10:05 p.m., an eerie silence fell over part of the West Block. The fires were dying down, but the power was still out. The guards who'd survived the first wave were regrouping, armed with shotguns and flashlights. They moved cautiously through the darkened hall, light beams slicing through smoke. Then they found something that made every man freeze. Carved into the concrete wall, written in what looked like soot and blood, were the words, "No one leaves until justice is done." But whose justice? As officers pushed deeper, they found 3 inmates dead, not guards but prisoners. Each had a single mark carved into their arm, a small, crude X. No money missing, no signs of robbery. Just execution-style killings in the middle of chaos. Outside, reporters had already gathered. The world was watching. The governor was demanding answers. Inside, Doyle finally reconnected with central control through a backup line. "We need to shut it down now," he said. "They're not trying to get out. They're hunting someone." By 11 p.m., SWAT had breached the West Yard, pushing through tear gas and broken glass. They found dozens of prisoners surrendering, beaten, burned, terrified. But most refused to talk. One inmate, barely conscious, whispered something to the medic as he was carried out on a stretcher. They weren't after us. They were after him. The medic leaned in. Who? The inmate coughed, blood filling his mouth. Hollis, but he's not who you think. And just as the first glimpse of dawn crept over the prison walls, officers forced open the steel doors leading to the solitary wing, where Hollis was supposedly kept. But when they opened the cell, they froze. The bed was empty. The chains were cut. And on the wall, written in charcoal, were two words that would haunt San Quentin for decades. I warned you. The ghost in the system. Before we continue, remember, every wall hides a secret, and some secrets are buried so deep they scream to be found. Hit subscribe because this story is about to go darker than anyone imagined. The sun had barely risen over Marin County when helicopters hovered above San Quentin, their blades chopping through the smoky morning air. The riot was technically over, but the aftermath was worse than the chaos itself. Dozens were injured. 6 inmates confirmed dead. 3 guards unaccounted for. And the man believed to have started it all, Hollis, had vanished into thin air. Detective Samuel Greer, a veteran investigator with the California Department of Corrections, arrived at 6:45 a.m. His trench coat still smelled like stale coffee and cigarette smoke. He'd been pulled out of another case, a smuggling ring involving prison staff, to handle what the governor now called a catastrophic breach of state security. Greer had seen riots before, but this one felt different. It wasn't rage-fueled chaos. It was surgical, precise, deliberate. Show me his file, Greer said as he stepped into the command tent outside the prison gates. A young officer handed him a thick manila folder. Across the top, in red ink, were the words, Inmate number 4076, Hollis, Marcus Dean. Greer flipped through the pages. Born 1950. Convicted of double homicide in 1974. Sentence, life without parole. Known aliases, Hollis, Red King, MD. But what caught Greer's attention wasn't Hollis's crime. It was a handwritten note at the bottom of the file. Subject was transferred from Folsom in 1979 under sealed directive. No visitation, no parole hearings, limited contact. Classified correspondence only. That was highly unusual. It meant someone high up didn't want Hollis talking. Where's his cell? Greer asked. Solitary block C. Or what's left of it, said Officer Doyle, limping slightly, his arms still bandaged from the night before. They walked through the scorched corridors. The air reeked of burnt rubber and bleach. The walls were smeared with ash, and the echo of boots on concrete seemed unnaturally loud. When they reached Hollis's cell, Greer stopped cold. The inside looked untouched, except for the chain-cut marks and the words scrawled in black. I warned you. Who was on duty here last night? Greer asked. Doyle swallowed hard. Officer McKenna. He didn't make it. They found his badge near the kitchen, no body. Greer crouched beside the bed frame, examining the cuts on the shackles. This wasn't done in a hurry. Someone used industrial-grade bolt cutters. He looked up, meaning someone inside had access. They both knew what that meant, inside help. By noon, the investigation had uncovered something chilling. A set of maintenance tunnels ran beneath San Quentin, old service routes from the 1940s, long sealed off but not completely forgotten. When search teams entered them, they found signs of recent movement, fresh footprints, discarded food wrappers, and an inmate's uniform torn at the sleeve. But no Hollis. Meanwhile, Greer began tracing Hollis's past. He wasn't just a random inmate. Before prison, Marcus Hollis had been a defense contractor for the U.S. military, specialized in electrical systems and grid architecture. In other words, the man who once designed secure power infrastructures was now the one who'd shut San Quentin's down. The file went deeper. He'd been convicted after a mysterious explosion at a private defense lab killed 2 engineers. Hollis claimed he was framed. The court dismissed his testimony as paranoid delusion. But something about it didn't add up. In one of the archived letters written from Folsom Prison, Hollis warned, "They're building something worse. If it goes wrong, people will die. Tell them I tried to stop it." Greer read that line 3 times. They? Who were they? That night, Greer stayed in the prison's admin office, going over surveillance logs. Around 8:12 p.m., roughly an hour before the riot, a camera in the West Corridor captured a guard unlocking a restricted maintenance door. The footage was grainy, distorted, and flickered out seconds later. But the frame before it went black showed something unmistakable. The guard wasn't alone. A man in a gray prison uniform stood beside him, his face half hidden by shadow. When the footage was enhanced, Greer froze. The inmate's face didn't match Hollis's file photo. "Who the hell is this?" he muttered. Doyle leaned over. "That's not Hollis." Greer frowned. "Then who walked out of that cell?" 2 days later, a call came in from a gas station 20 miles north. The clerk reported a man fitting Hollis's description buying fuel, wearing a guard's jacket, and carrying a large duffel bag. When police arrived, the clerk was gone, and so were the security tapes. Now the story wasn't just a prison riot. It was a manhunt. By day 5, rumors were spreading through San Quentin's population. Some inmates said Hollis had escaped through the tunnels. Others swore he never existed, that Hollis was a cover identity used by a man who worked for the government. Then, during a post-riot cleanup, officers found a burned file cabinet in the warden's office. Inside, partially charred, was a single document stamped confidential, CalCorp defense contracts. The date, June 1974. The same year Hollis was convicted. It referenced a project called Black Current. And underlined in red ink were 5 words: "Keep Hollis under permanent isolation." Greer's hands trembled as he set the paper down. "This isn't about a riot," he said quietly. This was containment. Before Doyle could respond, a radio call crackled through. "Detective Greer, we've got a situation. You'd better see this." They followed the sound of shouts toward the main yard. A group of officers were standing around something scrawled in soot on the wall, just below a shattered security camera. The message read, "I'm still inside." But when they checked every cell, every hallway, every tunnel, there was no trace of Hollis. Only one cell door stood slightly open, its hinges creaking in the faint breeze. And sitting neatly on the cot inside was Officer McKenna's missing badge. The man who never left. Before we close this case, remember, in every story of justice, there's a shadow that refuses to fade. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear isn't the end, it's what they never wanted anyone to find. The cell block was dead quiet. No shouts. No footsteps. Just the low hum of the prison lights flickering through layers of smoke and dust. Detective Greer stood in front of the open cell, staring at Officer McKenna's badge glinting faintly under the light. The nameplate was melted slightly, as if it had been in a fire, but the blood stain on its edge looked fresh. "Baggett," Greer said, his voice low, steady. But as the evidence tech bent down, the intercom system crackled. "Control to yard units. Power fluctuation in Block C again. Cameras are rebooting." Greer's pulse quickened. That was impossible. Block C had been offline for 2 days. He turned toward the hallway, eyes narrowing. "Who's running the control room tonight?" Nobody, sir." "The whole section's empty," Doyle answered, uneasy. Then came a faint echo, metallic footsteps, slow and deliberate, from the far end of the corridor. Greer motioned for his flashlight, drawing his sidearm. The beam sliced through the haze, bouncing off rusted bars and old warning signs. The smell of burnt insulation still hung heavy in the air. "Who's there?" Silence. Then a voice, distorted, distant, floated through the hall. "They never shut it down, they just buried it." Greer's grip tightened. "Show yourself." No answer. Just a faint mechanical hum growing louder from the electrical control room ahead. They pushed the door open and stopped dead. The room was filled with open panels, wires snaking across the floor. Monitors flickered between static and fragments of old footage. Inmates eating, guards pacing, explosions, then black screens. At the center of the chaos stood a figure in a torn guard uniform, face streaked with grime, eyes wild. Marcus Hollis. But he didn't look like the man from the file photo. Older, thinner, almost unrecognizable, except for the same burn scar curling down his neck. "Freeze!" Doyle shouted. Hollis didn't move. Instead, he turned toward them slowly, hands raised halfway. His voice was hoarse, like someone who hadn't spoken in years. "You think I started this?" he said. "You think I wanted the riot? They made sure I died here before anyone found out." "Found out what?" Greer demanded. "That this prison isn't a prison anymore. It's a testing ground." Greer frowned. "Testing for what?" "Control," Hollis said. "Black current. It wasn't a weapon, it was a system. An experimental power grid designed to override behavior through current modulation. They used it here, on inmates. Low-frequency shocks, subliminal signals. They said it was rehabilitation. It was torture." Doyle's face went pale. "You're saying the prison was the prototype," Hollis interrupted. "They buried the files after Folsom. Moved me here because I knew too much. But when the grid failed last week, it woke up the old circuits. The entire prison was being triggered. Every man inside felt it. That's why the riot started." Greer took a slow step forward. "If that's true, why escape? Why kill guards?" "I didn't kill anyone," Hollis snapped. "But they did." He pointed toward the security screens, which now flickered with footage Greer had never seen. Men in lab coats, guards in hazmat suits, a metal chair wired to the floor, restraints glowing faint blue. The timestamp read 1979. Greer's stomach turned. This was never a riot. It was a reset, Hollis said bitterly. They needed to erase the evidence. A sudden buzz cut through the air. The power surged, lights dimming. Hollis flinched. "They found us." "What do you mean they?" Greer asked. Hollis's voice trembled. "The people who built it. They're still monitoring. Always have been." Before Greer could respond, a loud bang echoed through the hallway, the control room door locking from the outside. Doyle lunged for the handle. "We're trapped." The lights flickered, then the monitors all turned to a single feed, a live CCTV view of the room itself. In the corner of the screen, the system log read, "Black current, emergency purge sequence engaged." Hollis's eyes widened in terror. "You need to cut the main line now." Greer moved fast, slamming open a breaker panel. Sparks flew as he yanked the primary cables. The hum deepened into a roar. "Pull it," Hollis shouted. Greer grabbed the line, and then everything went dark. When Greer opened his eyes, dawn light seeped through the cracked window of the admin building. Paramedics moved around him. Doyle sat nearby, dazed, his uniform torn. What happened?" Greer asked. "The power grid overloaded," Doyle murmured. "Half the control wing burned out. We barely made it." Greer sat up slowly. "Where's Hollis?" Doyle looked at him, blank, uncertain. "There's no record of him." "What do you mean?" "They searched every room, every camera, every log. There's no trace of Marcus Hollis ever being in San Quentin." Greer's blood ran cold. "That's not possible. I saw him. We both did." Doyle's eyes flickered. "Maybe you did. But his file, it's gone. Erased from the system." Greer rose to his feet, heart pounding. Outside, smoke curled from the prison towers. Reporters had already started gathering near the gates. But something caught his eye, a flicker of light from the command tent. On a nearby monitor, one of the last functioning CCTV feeds played a loop. The corridor outside Block C. Empty. Silent. Then, for just a moment, a shadow moved across the frame. A figure in a torn guard uniform, walking calmly down the hall, toward the exit. Then static. Greer stared at it for a long time. He turned to Doyle. "Did they rebuild the grid?" Doyle shook his head. "No, sir. They shut it down completely." But as they left the prison yard, the streetlights outside flickered, just once. And faintly, through the static of a forgotten intercom speaker, came a whisper. "You can shut it down, but you'll never shut it off."